All right, this is section 3.1, part B. Our objective for today is the student will be able to solve quadratics by factoring. So our steps to factor. You learned these in Algebra 1, so there's really no change, but just a quick review and a little bit more complicated problems. So our steps to factor. The first thing we want to do is write it in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we want to set it equal to 0. And then you always want to check and make sure you remove the greatest common factor, because when you do the x method, if you don't pull out the greatest common factors, there's some problems that can occur. And so when you pull out that greatest common factor, you also want to make sure that a is greater than 0, so we want it to be positive. So if that a is negative, even if there's no greatest common factor, just pull out a -1 and work from there. And I'll do one of those to show you to start with. Then fill out using the x method. And if you remember from your Algebra 1 days, a times c goes on top, b goes on bottom, and then these two spots are filled by the things that multiply together to give you a and c, and then add up to give you b, or subtract to give you b. If a is equal to 1, it's going to be completed. It's already factored, and you can go from there. But if it's not great, if a is greater than 1, then you have to build the box, which we'll go through when we go through some problems. And then the last step is to use the zero product property to solve each factor. And the zero product property is if a and b are expressions, and a times b equals 0, if two things multiply together give you 0, the only way that's possible is if a is 0 or b is 0. So one of them has to be 0. So if you have all these notes written down, we'll go through some examples. So you might want to pause the video, go back, make sure you get the steps written down, and then we're going to go through them one by one as we go through some problems. So let's start with this example, our first one. Negative 8x squared plus 20x plus 48 equals 0. Okay? So if we follow step number 1, we're going to remove the greatest common. It's already in the form we want, but we have to remove the greatest common factor. So we look at this and say, is there anything that goes into 8, 20, and 48? And so the largest thing that goes into all three of those is 4. So I'm going to pull a 4 out. But remember, I want to make sure that a is greater than 0. So I want that to be a positive number, so I'm going to pull out a -4. So we pull out that -4, and then we divide each of these by -4. Or you say, what times -4 gives you those? The same thing. So this would be 2x squared. -40 is 20, we get -5x. And -4 into 48 would be a -12. So, if I was to multiply this -4, I should end up back where I was. So -4 times 2 is -8, -4 times -5 is positive 20, and -4 times -12 is a positive 48. So, now we're going to fill out using the x method. So a times c. So this -4 now we don't have to worry about any longer, because there's no x with that. If there was an x with it, we'd deal with that, but you won't have any on the assignment like that today. So our a times c, so 2 times -12 is -24, and b is a -5. So we have to find the numbers that multiply together to give you -24 and add up to give you -5. Well, the only way we can get a negative number here is if a or c is negative and the other one's positive. So some of you will be good at this and you'll be able to look at that and tell right away. But let's just list the factors of 24. We could be 1 and 24. But those, whichever one's negative, it would give us 23 or -23. And we need -5. We could go 2 and 12. 2 and 12 would give us 10 or -10. 3 goes in 8 times. Well, 3 and 8, if you go 8 minus 3, that would be 5, but we want a -5, so that means the 3 is positive and the 8 is negative. And so now I'm going to fill those in. And so 1 is 3 and 1 is -8. So we found our factors. If a was 1, we'd be done. it'd be x plus 3 and x minus 8. But if we look at this, our a is 2. So this is where we have to fill in the box. So we build a box. And there's different ways your algebra teachers might have had you complete this, but I'll show it the way I do it, and you can do whatever works best for you. So, the first term goes in the first box. The last term goes in the last box. And then our factors, 3 and negative 8, come from here, and it doesn't make any difference. You can put the 3x there and the negative 8 there, or the negative 8 there and the 3 there. It won't make any difference. So I'm going to plug in, I'm just going to go, the first one's 3, so I'm going to go 3x. And you have to put x's with these, and so negative 8x. So once you've done that, now what we're going to do is we're going to pull out the greatest common factor of each row and each column. So let's start with the columns. The greatest common factor that goes into 2 and negative 8 would be 2, and then this has an x squared and this has an x, so I could pull a 2x out of both those. Greatest common here of 3x and negative 12, I can pull 3 goes into both those, so I pull out a 3, and then whatever this first box is what the sign is. So that's a positive, and so that's a 2x plus 3. So now we've gotten the going up and down, so now let's go across. So in this, nothing goes into 2 and 3, but I have an x squared and an x, so I can pull an x out of both those. And I can pull out of the 8 and 12, I can pull a 4 out, and then the first box is negative, so that's a minus. So let's write this right here. So I still have this negative 4 if I'm just writing the whole thing out. So negative 4 times, I've got this and this. So 2x plus 3 and x minus 4. Again, it doesn't make any difference what form you put that in. You could put the x minus 4 there and the 2x plus 3 there. Now, I like to right here just check it and make sure I'm correct. So if I was to FOIL this, 2x times x gives me the 2x squared. Negative 8x and 3x gives me the negative 5x. And 3 times the negative 4 gives me the negative 12, so I've done that right. So now we have it factored, and we factored this into negative 4 times 2x plus 3 and x minus 4 equals 0. So we really have 3 things multiplied together. But negative 4 can't be 0 because it's just negative 4. So that means if I use the zero product property, either 2x plus 3 equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. And then it becomes a simple algebra problem. You just solve this one for x and you solve this one for x. So I'll show you the long way and then I'll show a shortcut that you can use. But if I was just to do this algebraically, I would subtract 3 and get 2x equals negative 3. And then I would divide by 2 and get x equals negative 3 halves. Or on this one, I would add 4 to both sides and get x equals 4. And so my solutions are negative 3 halves and positive 4. Those are the values of x that would make this expression equal to 0. Now, when you write these, this is called the set of negative 3 halves and 4. You don't want to use parentheses because then it means an order. Excuse me. It means it's an ordered pair, which would be an x and a y. All right. So that's one example. So I'm going to try and cover everything you possibly could see in this as we go through this. So I'm going to go ahead and go back. And let's do another one. So number 2. 6x squared plus 11x minus 10 equals 0. So it's in the form we want. We check for greatest common factor. There's nothing that goes into 6, 11, and 10 except 1, so we don't need to do anything there. A is greater than 0, so we're okay. So we can go straight to step 2. So A times C, 6 times 10 is negative 10 is negative 60. And B is 11. So we need the numbers that multiply together to give us negative 60 and add up to give us 11. So again, they're opposites, so one's positive and one's negative. So again, I could go 1 and 60, that would be 59. I could go 2 and 30, but that would be 28. I could go 3 and 20, but that would be 17. I could go 4 and 15. I need a positive 11, so if I make this positive and the 4 negative, then I get the positive 11. So my factors are 15 and negative 4. So now I check, is A 1? No, it's not. So now I have to build the box. So let's go ahead and build the box right here. So again, first box, first term. Last term goes in the last box. And then I fill out the rest of the box with my two numbers from the side here, 15 and negative 4. So 15, again, you put an x with that, and a negative 4x. Again, because the reason is on this is actually negative 60x squared, and so I need an x with both of those, and this is an 11x. So that's why those x's go there. So now I pulled out the greatest common factor of 6 and 15, which would be 3. And then they both have an x, so I pull an x out. Here, 4 and 10, I can pull a 2 out. The first box is negative, so that's a 3x minus 2. And then going down, 6 and 4 would be 2. They both have an x, so I can pull an x out. 15 and 10 would be 5. The first box is positive, so I get 2x plus 5. Again, if you'll just take 5 seconds to check this. 3x squared, 2x squared is 6x squared. Negative 2, positive 5, negative 10. And then 15 and negative 4 give me 11. So I know I got it right. So now once we have those, 3x minus 2. So now I use the zero product property. So 3x minus 2 equals 0, or 2x plus 5 equals 0. We use our algebra, we add 2, and then we get 3x equals 2, and then we divide by 3, and so x equals, one answer is going to be 2/3. Over here we subtract 5, and then divide by 2, and so negative 5/2. Now I talked about the shortcut. The shortcut is really easy with these. All you do is you take the opposite of this, the opposite of negative 2 is 2, and divide it by the number in front of x. So that would be 2/3. Right? The opposite of 5 is negative 5, divided by 2 is negative 5/2. It saves you having to go through those steps, because that's the process. We move it over to change, which changes the sign, and then we divide by that number. So it's pretty easy of a shortcut. So that's your second example. So for our third example, x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. So this is the easier type. So that, again, there is no greatest common factor. A is positive, so we're okay. A times C, so 1 times 6 is 6. B is negative 5. The numbers that multiply together to give you negative 5, or 6, and add up to give you negative 5. Well, 1 and 6 would give 7, or would give you negative 7. They both have to be negative to get a positive and a negative here. So it would have to be 2 and 3 because those add up to 5. So that would be negative 2 and negative 3. A is 1, so we're done. It's just x minus 2 and x minus 3. Again, check it. X times x, x squared, yes. Negative 2 times negative 3, positive 6. Negative 3 and negative 2 add up to give you negative 5. So I know it's right. I don't have to build the box. So again, let's just use the short. Again, you can set those equal to 0 and solve them. But the shortcut is simply the opposite of this would be 2 divided by 1 is 2. And the opposite of negative 3 is 3 divided by 1, which is 3. And we're done. And again, on all of these, you can check them. Just plug in 2. 2 squared is 4. Minus 5 times 2 is 10. 4 minus 10 is a negative 6. Plus 6 is 0. So 2 worked. Let's plug in 3. 3 squared is 9. 5 times 3 is 15. 9 minus 15 is a negative 6. Plus 6 is 0. So I know I got them right. All right. So, one more example to go over. 4. They can write these a little bit differently too. Let's take f of x equals 3x squared minus 14x plus 15. And when it writes it this way, it's going to ask you to find the zeros of the function. And when it says to find the zeros of the function, they want to know what you put in for x to get 0. So it's really the same thing, it's just written differently. So we do the exact same process. We've got it in the form we want. We just say, hey, this is equal to 0. We want to know when it's equal to 0. There is no greatest common factor. Our a is greater than 1, so we plug it in. A times c, 3 times 15 is 45. And negative 14. So we need the numbers that multiply together to give me 45 and add up to give me negative 14. Since this is negative and this is positive, they both have to be negative. So we just, again, you can look at them and tell sometimes, but if you can't, you just write them all out. 1 and 45, that's 46. 3 and 15, that would be 18. 5 and 9 would be 14, but again we need it to be negative 5 and negative 9. Our a is not 1, so we have to build the box. First term, first box. Last term, last box. And then these fill the other two. So negative 5x. Negative 9x. We pull out the greatest common factor. Let's take this row. That would be just x. 9 and 15, I can pull a 3 out. The first box is negative, so it's x minus 3. This way, I could pull a 3 and an x out. 5 and 15 would be 5. The first box is negative, so minus. And so this becomes x minus 3 and 3x minus 5. Now, I'm going to assume that you can algebraically solve those and set it equal to 0 and solve. So I'm just going to go through the shortcut again. The shortcut would be the opposite of this divided by the number in front. So Opposite negative 3 is 3, divided by 1 is 3. Opposite negative 5 is 5, divided by 3 is 5/3. And we're done. So now I'm going to give you 4 to try. These will be your MP problems. So, the first one, I'd like you to try. X squared plus 12x equals negative 35. The second one, 3x squared minus 5x equals 2. And then the last two are in function notation, so you're going to find the zeros. F of x equals 6x squared minus 24. And the last one, f of x equals negative 8x squared minus 18x minus 9. So I've intentionally put a little difficulty into these and formed them a little bit differently. But hopefully you can pause the video here and go through and do them and then come back and see how you did. So, if we take the first one, the first thing we have to do is write it in this form. And you can see a little bit differently than the practice problems. It says it's equal to negative 35 and we want it equal to 0. Well, that's easy. We just move the 35 back to this side by adding 35 to both sides. So now we've got it in the form we want. 1 times 35 is 35. 12. So we need the numbers that multiply to give you 35 and add up to give you 12, which are 5 and 7. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 plus 7 is 12. Our first number is 1, so it's factored. So it's x plus 5. Sorry. X plus 5 and x plus 7. And so we set those equal to 0. And again, whether you solved it algebraically or used a shortcut, the answer would be opposite of 5 is negative 5, divided by 1 is negative 5, and opposite of 7 is negative 7, divided by 1 is negative 7. So my solution set is negative 5, negative 7. So that's the first one. Let's go back and second one. So on the second one, again, it's not equal to 0. So the first thing you should have done was move the 2 back. So 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Negative 5, the numbers that multiply together to give you negative 6 and add up to give you negative 5 are negative 6 and 1. And again, just check those. Negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. But a is not 1, so you had to build the box on this one. So 3x squared minus 2 negative 6x positive 1x. Greatest common factor of 3 and 1 is 1, but we have an x. Negative 6 and 2 would be 2. The first box is negative, so that's a minus 2. 3x and 6x would be 3x. 1 and negative 2 is 1. First box is positive. So we get 3x plus 1. X minus 2. Again, it's not important what order you put those in. Again, it's a good idea to check. 3x squared, yes. 1 and negative 2, that checks. And then negative 6 plus 1 is a negative 5x, so I know I'm right. And so this would be, the opposite of this would be negative 1 divided by 3, so negative 1/3. And the opposite of negative 2 is 2, divided by 1 is 2. And so you should have gotten negative 1/3 and 2. Let's go to example, or MP3. Alright, so now this one's a little different. Again, it's the function notation. So we want to know, when is this equal to 0? But now we don't have a b. So we just have 6x squared minus 24 equals 0. So now, remember, our 6 is a and our negative 24. But the first thing we want to do is remove the greatest common factor. So is there something that goes into 6 and negative 24? And that would be 6. I can pull the 6 out. So I pull the 6 out, and I get x squared minus 4 equals 0. Again, we're not going to worry about this 6. We only worry about things that have x's with them. So, our a times c, 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. But our b, there is no b, so it's 0. So we want the numbers that multiply together to give you negative 4 and add up to give you 0, which would be 2 and negative 2. Now, our a is now 1. So we're done. It's x plus 2 and x minus 2. That 6 is out here. But again, that 6 can't be equal to 0. So we only have to worry about these two parts, the factors, that have x's. And so the opposite of 2 would be negative 2. And the opposite of negative 2 would be positive 2. And so we're done. It's negative 2 and positive 2. So last one to go over, example number 4. So, again, negative 8x squared minus 18x minus 9, and we just set it equal to 0 if it's in function form. Now there's nothing that goes into negative 18 and negative 9. But remember, we want this first term to be greater than 0. So what we're going to do is simply pull a negative 1 out. 8x squared minus 18x plus 18x plus 9. Again, we pulled the negative 1 out of everything, so it changed all the signs. So now this equals 0. So 8 times 9, 72, and 18. So we want the numbers that multiply together to give us 72 and add up to give us 18. So let's go 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 6 and 12. There they are. They add up to 18. Now again, we don't need to worry about this negative 1 when we build our box. Our first box, first term, 8x squared. 9 goes in the last box. And then these, fill in the other two, 6x and 12x. Pull out the greatest common factors of 8 and 6 are 2x. Of 12 and 9 would be 3. First box is positive, so plus. 8 and 12 would be 4x. And 6 and 9 would be 3, positive. So we get 2x plus 3 and 4x plus 3. Again, just check it. 2 times x times 4x is 8x squared. 3 times 3 is 9. Then we get 12 and 6 and 12, which gives us 18. So we know we're right. And then we can just use the shortcut. The opposite of 3 is negative 3 divided by 2. Negative 3 halves. The opposite of 3 is negative 3 divided by 4 is... And again, if you can't remember the shortcut, you just set it equal to 0, subtract 3, and so we get 2x equals negative 3, then divide by 2, and you get your negative 3 halves. And then the 4x, plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3, and we get 4x equals negative 3. Divide by 4, and that gives us the negative 3/4. So you get the same thing either way, whichever works best for you. So please, again, come with questions if it doesn't make sense. We can go through as many of these as you want. The assignment will be on the big ideas, and it's page 127 to 34 all and 47 to 54 all. The first set is when they're equal to 0 or they don't have function notation. The second set's when it's function notation, and you just have to set it equal to 0. So hopefully that went well, and you'll be ready to go.